A quiet welcome to Restful Historian. Let's journey together into the often overlooked details surrounding why you wouldn't survive a day as a peasant during the Mongol invasions. Before we begin, if you find value in these stories, perhaps take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps others find the channel. You can also let me know in the comments where you're listening from and the time. It's always fascinating to see our quiet community grow around the world. Now, find a comfortable position, perhaps dim the lights or turn on a soft fan for background noise, and let's ease into tonight's story together. Let's drift back, centuries before the thunder of hooves would change everything, to a world already deeply etched with hardship. Picture, if you will, your awakening. It's not to the gentle chime of an alarm, but to the persistent, seeping chill that finds its way through the rough-spun wool of your tunic, perhaps the only garment you own. The air inside your small, smoke-tinged hut is a cocktail of scents. Damp earth from the floor beneath you, the lingering ghost of last night's meager fire, and the undeniable musky aroma of livestock, perhaps even sharing your cramped living space. Light, when it comes, is a pale, grudging visitor, filtering weakly through a tiny, unglazed window or a crack in the wattle and daub walls. Your bed? Forget soft mattresses. You'd be rising from a pile of straw, possibly teeming with less than welcome tiny companions, laid directly on the cold, hard ground. There's no lingering under warm duvets here. The day demands your immediate attention every single day. The sounds that accompany your morning are not of bustling cities, but the lowing of a cow, the grunt of a pig, the distant crow of a rooster, all mingling with the sigh of the wind as it sweeps across open, often unforgiving fields. This is the symphony of survival, a constant, low hum of effort. Your hands are already calloused. Your back already knows the familiar ache from endless toil, bending and lifting under a vast, indifferent sky. And this, remember, is just an ordinary day, long before the eastern horizons began to whisper of new, unimaginable terrors. This baseline of quiet struggle is the world you inhabit, a life lived on the very edge of sustenance. Now, picture this. Long before the first hint of dawn even considers painting the sky, you stir. The darkness inside your small, earth-floored hut is profound, a thick blanket muffling the world outside. If you're lucky, a sliver of pre-dawn gray might seep through a poorly sealed window shutter, or a gap in the rough wooden door, just enough to distinguish the vague shapes of your sleeping family, huddled close for shared warmth against the pervasive chill. The air itself is cold, biting at any exposed skin, and it carries a familiar, layered scent. There's the faint, almost ghostly aroma of old wood smoke, not from a comforting hearth, but from the embers of a fire that offered little more than a suggestion of warmth hours ago, its memory now just a faint acridness in your nostrils. Beneath that, the ever-present damp mineral smell of the packed earth floor, cool and unyielding underfoot when you eventually brave placing your feet down. It's a smell that clings to your rough-spun clothes, to your hair, a constant reminder of your closeness to the soil that both sustains and confines you. The silence is deep, punctuated only by the soft rustles of straw bedding, and the quiet, rhythmic breathing of those sharing this cramped, cold space with you. Perhaps the distant, mournful lowing of a cow or the scuttling of a mouse in the thatch above serves as a subtle reminder of the world stirring outside. This is the very first chapter of your day, an awakening not to gentle light or bird song, but to an immediate, sensory reminder of life's persistent chill, a chill that settles deep in your bones long before any thought of invaders could even form. The chill from the earthen floor seems to seep into your very being as you rise, the lingering dampness of the night air clinging to your rough-spun clothes. There's no warm, bustling kitchen beckoning, no comforting aroma of frying bacon or brewing coffee to greet you. Instead, your first meal awaits, a stark testament to the day's expected, back-breaking toil. Imagine reaching for a piece of bread. It's not soft, nor invitingly warm from an oven. This is a dense, dark loaf, coarse to the touch, almost gritty with stray bits of millstone, a far cry from anything light or airy. Breaking off a hunk takes genuine effort, your fingers struggling against its unyielding texture. As you chew, the taste is profoundly earthy, perhaps a little sour from the starter, a world away from anything you'd call truly satisfying. This isn't a pleasure, it's fuel, and precious little of it at that, designed merely to blunt the sharpest edges of hunger. And to wash this down? A rough wooden cup of ale, but certainly not the rich, foamy brew you might picture from a cheerful, fire-lit tavern. This is thin, weak, and distinctly cloudy, likely lukewarm and carrying a slightly vinegary tang. Its main virtue isn't flavor, but that it's marginally safer to drink than the murky water from the local well or stream. This meager offering, this hunk of unyielding bread and thin ale, is your shield against the gnawing hunger that will accompany every swing of the scythe, every furrow plowed under a vast, uncaring sky. It's a fragile defense, easily breached, even before the distant thunder of hooves might one day announce an entirely new kind of emptiness, a deeper chill still. That thin ale and coarse bread, already settling heavily, must somehow fuel you through a day that stretches out as vast and unforgiving as the fields themselves. Long before the first true light, a pale gray wash across the eastern horizon signals the start. You're out there, in the pre-dawn chill, the dew still clinging to every blade of grass, your breath misting in the air. The tools are simple, crude, and heavy. A wooden plow that fights you with every step. A scythe that will soon feel like an extension of your aching arm. Imagine the sun, a relentless eye, climbing slowly, then seeming to hang, suspended at its zenith, beating down on your bent back. The air shimmers with heat. Dust, fine and choking, kicked up by your worn leather shoes or bare feet, coats your throat, clings to your sweat-dampened skin. The sounds are those of exertion. The rhythmic grunt as you heave the hoe, the sigh of the earth turning, releasing its damp, loamy scent into the morning air, the endless buzzing drone of insects, and the distant, perhaps mournful call of a bird. There's no escape from the labor, no shade to truly offer solace, just the endless rows, the unyielding soil, a landscape that can feel as much a prison as a provider. Your hands, calloused and raw, might bleed, but the work doesn't pause. By the time that same sun finally kisses the horizon, painting the sky in brief, beautiful hues you're too exhausted to truly appreciate, every muscle screams. The day is a testament to endurance, a constant battle waged with little more than sinew and hope, a hope that feels thinner than that morning ale when you consider what those distant hooves might truly signify. And what of your tools? They are extensions of those aching hands, almost a part of you. Let's picture them. Feel the wood of the hoe handle, perhaps. It's smoothed by years, maybe generations of calloused palms, worn down by endless seasons of toil. It isn't polished or fine, but shaped by sheer necessity, by the constant pressure of your grip, by the very sweat that seeps into its fibers. You'd know every grain, every tiny imperfection, a familiar, almost comforting landscape under your fingers, even if comfort itself has become a distant, hazy memory. Or perhaps it's a sickle, its curved blade glinting dully in the mind's fading light. The wood of its handle, too, is part of your hand's story, stained with earth and the residue of relentless effort. Its metal edge, painstakingly sharpened on a rough whetstone you keep guarded, carries the faint, almost metallic tang of iron and the dry, sweet scent of cut grasses from harvests past. Harvests that now seem an eternity ago. These aren't instruments of grand design, crafted for glory or conquest. They are your humble partners in a relentless, quiet war waged daily against hunger, against the stubborn earth. They are your constant companions, these simple implements. The hoe that breaks the stubborn clods of baked earth, the sickle that reaps the meager bounty, if the rains and sun have been kind. They lean against the mud and wattle wall of your hut as the day finally surrenders to dusk, silent, earthy witnesses to your struggle. Perhaps they're the only things that truly understand the crushing weight of your days. The silent prayers whispered with each swing, each cut into the soil. So simple, these tools. So vital. And yet so utterly, tragically fragile against the iron tide that those distant hooves might truly signify, as true darkness begins to blanket the land. Your village, this small cluster of human warmth and familiar anxieties, draws in on itself. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and the evening's meager cooking, perhaps a thin, watery stew with a few precious herbs, carries the low hum of voices from neighboring huts. These aren't grand pronouncements, but the quiet exchanges of people who have shared the same sun, the same fears, the same muddy pathways for a lifetime. Every shadowed face you might pass is known, every family's history intertwined with your own, like the gnarled roots of an ancient tree. This is your entire world, held within the scent of damp earth and the sight of thatched roofs against a deepening sky. It's a web of shared toil, of whispered gossip, and the occasional, precious burst of communal laughter during a rare festival. There's a certain comfort in this predictability, a sense of belonging that wraps around you like a rough-spun, smoky blanket. But it's a blanket that can also feel heavy, confining. For this intricate, tight-knit community is also a place of unyielding expectations and very little room for personal deviation. The path ahead of you is not a landscape of choices, but a well-worn track, grooved deep by generations before. You know your place. You must. The village elder, whose quiet word can shape your future or unmake it with a single, thoughtful frown. The watchful eyes of neighbors who notice every small departure from the norm. Want to choose your own spouse, your own trade, perhaps even what you truly think. The village and the unwritten laws of centuries often have other plans, etched in tradition as deeply as the lines on your grandfather's hands. Your freedom is a small, carefully tended garden, and its boundaries are visible to all. And those visible boundaries extend, don't they, far beyond the fences of your small life, right to the very edge of the cultivated land, where the village's fate is sown and hopefully reaped. Here, under an immense and often indifferent sky, lies the true measure of your days, your seasons, your very existence. Each sunrise, you might feel the familiar ache settle into your lower back, even before your hand closes around the hoe, its wooden handle worn smooth and dark, almost an extension of your own arm, and the arm of your father before you. The very air in the field seems to hum with a quiet tension, a collective breath held by every soul in the village. A silent prayer on the wind. You watch the first tender shoots emerge from the soil, delicate green pushing through the dark, damp earth, and you nurture a hope so fierce it's almost a physical pain in your chest. Is that patch over there looking a little thinner than last year? Did the unexpected late frost, sharp and cruel, bite too deep into the young plants? The sun beats down relentlessly, baking the clods of earth, or the promised rain simply refuses to fall? And every subtle shift in the wind's direction, every unusual cloud formation that scuds across the vast empty canvas above, is a portent, a whisper of feast, or, far more often, of famine. Even as the grain heads finally begin to swell, nodding golden and heavy, promising a rich bounty, a persistent sliver of cold fear remains lodged deep in your gut. One sudden, violent hailstorm, one unseen infestation of creeping rust or burrowing weevils, one unseasonably early snow blanketing the unharvested fields, and all the careful, desperate calculations for surviving the lean winter months can crumble to bitter dust. This quiet, gnawing worry is your most constant companion, a shadow that lengthens even under the brightest summer sun, an unspoken understanding that the earth gives, but it also, so very easily and with such little warning, takes away. And yet, even with that shadow always near, even with the earth's fickle temperament, life wasn't solely a grim procession towards an early grave. Tiny, unexpected sparks of joy could, and did, flicker in the gloom, all the more precious for their rarity. Picture this. The day's relentless labor is finally done. The sun bleeds across the western sky, a wash of soft apricot and bruised purple, and the air, thick with the day's heat and dust, begins to cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and perhaps the distant smell of wood smoke from a neighbor's hearth. Your own muscles sing with a familiar ache, a testament to another day survived. Then, someone might start a song. Not a performance, nothing grand, but a low, simple melody, perhaps a lament for lost love or a ballad of ancient forgotten kings, sung in a voice cracked with tiredness, but filled with a strange, resilient spirit. Others might join, their voices weaving a rough, unpolished tapestry of sound that hangs in the twilight air. It's a sound that speaks of shared burdens, of a common lot, or perhaps an old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, gathers the children, her voice a dry rustle as she spins a tale, a story of clever talking animals, or of foolish giants, her words painting pictures in the deepening darkness. And, for a precious hour, the hunger pangs and the lurking fears are held at bay. Maybe it's the shared warmth of bodies huddled close as night descends, a brief, unspoken comfort. These weren't grand feasts or raucous celebrations. They were the quiet breaths between hardships, small, flickering embers of humanity tended carefully against a vast and indifferent darkness. But those small comforts, those flickering embers, were always under threat. Not just from distant armies, but from the very air you breathed, the water you drank. Imagine, for a moment, a simple scratch. A splinter from a poorly made wooden bowl, perhaps, or a graze from a rusty farming tool you clutched for hours under a harsh sun. Today, a quick wash, a plaster, and it's largely forgotten. Back then, such a small wound was an open door, an invitation to unseen dangers. Within days, you might feel the angry red swelling begin, the skin around it hot and tight, a dull, throbbing ache deepening into something far more sinister as it pulsed in time with your anxious heart. There were no antibiotics, no real understanding of germs, just the creeping dread as a fever might take hold, your body burning from within, or a chill shaking you to the bone. Sickness, in myriad forms, was a constant companion, a shadow that clung to every village, as common as the mud in the lanes. A winter cough, seemingly innocuous, could settle deep in the lungs, refusing to leave, stealing your breath. A tainted sip of water in the summer heat could bring on a sickness that drained the life from you with alarming speed. The village healer, often an elder wise in the ways of herbs gathered from the forest edge, would offer what they could. A poultice of strange-smelling plants, crushed leaves bound with a strip of linen, or a bitter tea brewed from roots and bark, its taste lingering unpleasantly. Perhaps a prayer muttered over you, a charm painstakingly carved from wood tied to your wrist. These were acts of care, of desperation, born from a deep well of tradition and a desire to ease suffering. But against the relentless march of a serious infection or the ravages of dysentery, they were often little more than whispered hopes against a gathering storm. Your own body's resilience was your truest, and frequently your only, real defense, and even that was a gamble against overwhelming odds. Even if your body somehow held firm against the daily siege of illness and injury, your life was still not truly your own. Imagine, if you will, waking before the sun paints the sky, not to the gentle cooing of doves, but perhaps to the distant, metallic clang of the manor's bell, a sound carried on the chill morning air, or the louder, more insistent call of the village reeve, his voice rough as he summons you to labor. Your day, every day, was largely sketched out by forces far beyond your small, smoky hut and meager plot of land. The lord of the manor, a figure you might rarely see but whose presence loomed as large as the distant keep, owned your time, a significant portion of your hard-won harvest, and often your very obedience. The ache in your back before noon was a testament to his claim on your strength. Then there was the church, its cold stone walls, a constant, silent reminder of another, higher authority. Its teachings, whispered from the pulpit in Latin you barely understood, and woven into every festival, every fear, shaped your understanding of the world. From the turning of the seasons, dictated by saints' days, to the terrifying, fiery fate of your immortal soul, the Church held sway. The fear of eternal damnation was a potent shepherd, its shadow long, guiding your actions, your thoughts, even your quietest hopes. These twin pillars, the Lord and the Church, formed the very scaffolding of your existence. There was a certain grim predictability, a rhythm to it all, yes, but also an unyielding pressure, a sense that your path was laid out not by your own choosing, but by the ancient, heavy weight of tradition and the unshakable demands of those above you. To question it was almost unthinkable, as natural and as futile as questioning the rising sun itself. Your world was small, its boundaries sharply defined by duty and doctrine. And so, within this tightly bound world, where each day mirrors the last with an almost reassuring monotony, a subtle tremor begins. It's not a command barked from the manor house, nor a new penance whispered from the pulpit. Instead, it arrives on the weary shoulders of strangers, carried into your village as the sun bleeds orange and purple across the evening sky. Imagine, if you will, figures emerging from the deepening twilight, their silhouettes stark against the fading light. They are not familiar peddlers or wandering friars. Their clothes are tattered, caked with the grime of roads you cannot even picture, their faces hollowed by exhaustion and a fear that seems to cling to them like a second skin. They slump by the dwindling warmth of a communal fire, their eyes darting, reflecting the flickering flames with a haunted quality. At first, their words are hesitant, choked whispers, perhaps traded for a crust of bread or a sip of water. But soon, the tales begin to unfurl, strange and unsettling. They speak of a force from the distant, almost mythical East, a tide of humanity sweeping across lands you've only heard of in half-forgotten songs. They describe warriors unlike any seen before, horsemen numerous as a plague of locusts, appearing suddenly, like a storm gathering with impossible speed. These whispers paint pictures of immense, disciplined armies, of cities falling like dry leaves, of a power so vast and relentless it feels more like a force of nature than an army of men. To you, nestled in your small, familiar valley, these accounts sound almost like fables, dark and terrifying bedtime stories. Yet, the raw, unshakable dread in the travelers' voices, the sheer terror in their eyes as they recount what they've seen or heard, plants a tiny, cold seed of unease in the heart of your community. The world beyond your fields suddenly feels much larger and infinitely more threatening. That cold seed of unease, planted by those haunted travelers, begins to sprout with the arrival of a new word, a name that drifts into your village on the anxious breaths of fleeing merchants or weary pilgrims. Mongols. At first it's just a sound, perhaps misheard, bouncing off the damp stone of the village well, or murmured over the flickering, smoky light of the communal fire after the evening meal. It's a foreign-sounding name, isn't it? Two syllables that might roll off the tongue with a certain strangeness, a guttural catch, or a soft hiss, unlike the familiar cadence of your own language. There's no immediate, visceral terror in the sound itself, just curiosity, a questioning frown, perhaps a touch of suspicion for anything too far from your own plowed fields and familiar faces. But soon, that name, Mongols, becomes inexorably stitched to every dark rumor, every whispered horror that seeps into your small world. It's no longer just a curious sound, an exotic label for a distant people. It's the name, tied to the chilling stories of the endless, wind-swept plains and the earth-shattering thunder of hooves. The name, spoken in hushed, fearful tones, before tales of cities turned to smoldering ash, and rivers said to run red. Each repetition chips away at its initial unfamiliarity, replacing it with a growing, chilling weight. The word itself begins to feel heavy in the air, almost a physical presence, like the oppressive, metallic stillness before a devastating summer storm. You notice how the usually garrulous elders fall silent when it's uttered, their eyes clouding over, how even the boisterous children, playing in the dusty lanes seem to instinctively quieten, sensing a shift in the very atmosphere of your world. This unease, once a distant rumor carried on the wind, now settles over your small village like a fine, persistent dust, coating everything in a thin film of apprehension. The usual morning chorus, the clatter of wooden pails at the well, the cheerful, if sometimes desperate, bartering for a meager handful of grain, the distant, joyful shouts of children chasing scrawny chickens through the muddy pathways. It's all muted now, isn't it? Replaced by something far less comforting, something that makes the back of your neck prickle. You strain your ears, trying to anchor yourself with the familiar, but it eludes you. Instead, you catch the low, urgent hum of voices behind tightly shut doors, conversations that die away abruptly, like a snuffed candle if you happen to pass too close. The laughter that once echoed freely is now a rare and precious commodity, quickly stifled. Even the village dogs seem to sense it, their usual boisterous barks subdued to anxious whines and watchful growls at shadows. The blacksmith's hammer, usually a rhythmic, reassuring beat that sets the pulse of the day, now falls with a hesitant, almost reluctant clang, as if he too is listening for something else, something carried on that same wind, something far more ominous than a storm. The air itself feels thinner, stretched taut with unspoken fears, and the quiet moments are no longer peaceful, but heavy with waiting. Amidst this creeping dread, you might naturally seek solace, or at least a steadying word, from those figures who are meant to guide and protect. Imagine yourself looking towards the modest timber and wattle manor of your local lord, a man whose booming laugh once seemed to fill the entire valley with a sense of rough-hewn order. Now, when he rarely emerges, his pronouncements from the worn wooden steps feel thin, almost brittle. He might speak gruffly of exaggerated tales of mere bandits, or unruly travelers from lands so distant they might as well be myths, his voice attempting its familiar cadence of command. Yet, his eyes, usually sharp and assessing of every bushel of grain, now betray a distant focus, scanning the hazy horizon a little too often, his hand resting a little too heavily, a little too long, on the pommel of his old sword. It's less a show of authority, more a nervous habit, a tell. His attempts to dismiss the whispers as mere peasant gossip, easily scattered by a strong wind, ring hollow, perhaps even to his own ears. Then there is the village priest, his face, already weathered by sun and wind, now etched with a latticework of new worry lines around his tired eyes. In the small, perpetually damp stone church, the scent of old incense and beeswax candles hangs unusually thick, a desperate, fragrant attempt to purify the fear-laden air, to ward off the unseen. He urges prayer, his voice a low murmur that, if you listen closely, trembles ever so slightly when he speaks of divine protection and the evils that lurk beyond the familiar fields. He tells you of faith, of steadfastness in the face of the unknown, but his gaze often drifts to the single grimy window, as if he too expects to see some dreadful, shadowy herald materialize beyond the ancient, imperfect glass. The familiar litanies, once a source of profound comfort, now seem like fragile, whispered shields against an encroaching, unimaginable storm. Their poorly concealed unease, their fragile reassurances, only serve to deepen your own quiet, gnawing terror. The priest's unease, like a seed of disquiet, has already taken root in the village air, a subtle change in its usual rhythm. Then, one gray afternoon, the shift becomes undeniable. It's not a shout or a warning bell at first, but a low, collective murmur from the direction of the eastward track, a sound like dry leaves skittering before a storm, or perhaps the distant, troubled buzzing of a disturbed hive. Your heart, already attuned to the gnawing terror the priest tried to soothe, quickens with a cold dread. You find yourself drawn, along with the other villagers, towards the source of this growing sound. And then you see them. They are not a conquering army. Not yet. These are the first tendrils of the storm itself. People, or what's left of them, stumbling into your small, familiar world. Their faces are hollowed, etched with an exhaustion so profound it seems to have settled into their very bones. Their eyes. Their eyes are the worst, wide and vacant, yet flickering with the ghosts of horrors you cannot yet comprehend. They are caked in the dust of unfamiliar roads, their clothes little more than rags clinging to gaunt frames. Some weep silently, tears tracing clean paths through the grime on their cheeks. Others just stare, their lips moving without sound, or whisper fragmented, terrifying tales. Words like fire, horses, arrows like rain, and gone, all gone, drift through their broken accounts, painting a picture of swift, merciless devastation. They speak of an enemy that moves like the wind, leaving only silence and ruin in its wake. The stories are disjointed, choked with fear, but they weave a tapestry of such utter despair that the priest's fragile reassurances from before now feel like a cruel, distant dream. The whispers and cries of the survivors cling to the air, each fragment a jagged piece of a horrifying mosaic. You try to make sense of it, to form a coherent image of this advancing doom. But the invaders they describe, they are unlike anything known. Not just men, but a force, an elemental power. How do you truly comprehend an army that moves with the wind? One day there's just the familiar horizon, the slow turning of the seasons, the predictable rhythm of your village life. The next, according to these breathless, haunted accounts, a storm of men and horses has swept through, leaving only absence. Imagine, if you can, the sheer, bewildering speed. Your world is measured by the plodding pace of an ox cart, the time it takes for the sun to cross the sky, for grain to ripen. These invaders, they say, appear as if from nowhere, a dust cloud on the far edge of sight one moment, a roaring tide of destruction engulfing everything the next. There's no time to prepare, barely time to comprehend, before they are upon you. And then, just as swiftly, gone, moving on to the next unsuspecting valley, the next patch of tilled earth. And they consume. It's not just looting, not just the usual spoils of war you might have heard tales of from grizzled old soldiers. No, this is described as something more akin to a swarm of locusts, a wildfire devouring the land. They take the grain, the livestock, the timber, even the very straw from the roofs, leaving a barren, gnawed landscape behind. It's a relentless, systematic stripping of life and sustenance, as if the earth itself is being unmade before your eyes. The stories paint a picture not merely of conquest, but of an erasure, a swallowing void that moves with terrifying purpose. The air itself seems to hold its breath, heavy with the unspoken terror these stories have seeded deep within the community. And then, perhaps on an otherwise unremarkable afternoon, as you go about the rhythm of your daily toil, mending a rough-spun tunic, or coaxing a few precious greens from your meager patch of earth, you notice it, a subtle shift on the breeze. At first, it's almost nothing, a fleeting impression you might easily dismiss, but it carries something new, something distinctly alien to the familiar, earthy sense of your small world. The damp soil after a light rain, the musky warmth of livestock in their pens, the comforting wood smoke from your own small hearth, or your neighbor's cooking fire. This is different. It's a sharper, more acrid smell, thin and almost metallic on the wind, yet undeniably persistently there. It's the scent of distant burning, but not the controlled, domestic aroma of a village at peace. This smells of something vaster, more voracious, perhaps entire fields, or forests, or heartbreakingly, other villages just like yours, now turned to ash. The rumors, those terrifying tales whispered in hushed, fearful tones around flickering tallow lamps, suddenly feel less like distant thunder and more like a cold, physical presence. That faint, unfamiliar tang, carried on the indifferent wind, is the olfactory signature of approaching doom, the first undeniable sensory proof that the world beyond your small horizon is indeed unraveling, and that the unraveling is drifting, inexorably, your way. A peculiar stillness might settle over you then, a moment where the chirping of a sparrow seems unnaturally loud, the rustle of leaves in the trees too intrusive, as the true chilling meaning of that scent sinks deep into your bones, a silent alarm in the quiet of the day. That silent alarm in the quiet of the day gives way to a new, unsettling rhythm. The familiar, rhythmic clang from the blacksmith's forge, usually a comforting heartbeat in the village, might now be sporadic, hesitant, or altogether absent. You'd notice the change first in these small erosions of the predictable, the everyday reassurances that your world, however harsh, was at least your own. The village well, once a hub for morning gossip and the shared sighs of daily burdens, might now be a place of hurried, anxious glances, water drawn with hands that visibly tremble. There's no idle chatter, no laughter, just the mournful creak of the rope and the hollow slosh of water into too few buckets, as if even the water itself senses the scarcity to come. The village elder, whose pronouncements usually carried the weighty wisdom of countless seasons, might now offer only hollow platitudes, his aged eyes betraying a deep-seated fear that mirrors your own unspoken dread. Perhaps the reeve, the local enforcer of your distant lord's will, a man whose presence was usually a source of grumbling but also of order, is conspicuously absent. Or if he is still there, his usual gruff bluster is replaced by a thin, almost papery authority, his commands lacking their usual conviction. The sturdy routines that bind your days, the tending of those meager strips of land, the mending of worn tools, the grinding of precious grain, these begin to feel terribly fragile, almost poignantly pointless. Why plant what you may never harvest? Why mend what will soon be shattered? The very air feels thin, stretched taut with unspoken anxieties and the wild flight of rumors, each more terrifying than the last. And the silence from the direction of the Lord's modest, perhaps poorly fortified manor, is perhaps the most unnerving sound of all. It's a heavy silence that speaks not of peace, but of abandonment, or a paralysis as profound and chilling as your own. That heavy silence, which has pressed down upon your village for days, begins to change, subtly at first, then with undeniable insistence. It's not a sound that breaks it initially, but a feeling, a faint vibration through the packed earth floor of your hut, a tremor you might initially dismiss as your own heart pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs. But no, this is external, pervasive. You feel it through the soles of your worn leather shoes if you're standing, or through the thin straw mat if you're huddled inside. The very ground beneath you starting to hum, a low, resonant frequency. This hum deepens, a physical sensation that seems to travel up your bones, growing steadily, relentlessly, into a distinct thrum, then a palpable rumble. And then, riding on that wave of trembling earth, the sound arrives. It begins as a whisper, a distant sighing that could be the wind in far-off trees, but it swells, clarifies, into the unmistakable rhythmic drumming of hooves, not the familiar, scattered clatter of a local lord's small patrol, or the lonely clip-clop of a passing trader. This is different. This is a sound like 1,000 giants beating immense drums in unison, a rolling thunder that doesn't pass but instead intensifies, consuming all other noises. It is the sound of a sea of horses, countless hooves striking the earth with a terrible synchronized purpose, a sound heralding an unstoppable approach. The horizon itself seems to vibrate, promising not a storm of rain, but a storm of men and iron. And as that sound, that terrible drumming, continues to build, your eyes would instinctively scan the horizon, searching for the source, for some explanation. At first, it might be nothing, just the familiar sweep of the plains, the distant line where earth meets sky. But then, a smudge, a subtle darkening, low against the bruised colors of dawn, or the stark blue of midday. It's not the deep, angry gray of a rainstorm gathering, heavy with moisture. This is different. This is a terrestrial cloud, born of the earth itself, dry and vast. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, this stain on the world begins to spread, to rise. It doesn't billow and drift like a weather cloud. It expands with a grim, silent purpose, a colossal, earthbound entity. The color, perhaps, is a dry, choking ochre or a gritty, sun-bleached tan, depending on the land they relentlessly cross. It swallows the light, turning the bright day into a hazy, unsettling twilight, the familiar shapes of distant trees or hills blurring into indistinct smudges themselves. You might even taste it before you truly comprehend its scale, a faint, gritty bitterness on the tongue, the fine powder of 1,000 disturbed fields settling everywhere. This isn't the work of wind alone. No natural breeze could conjure such a phenomenon. This is the signature of movement on an unimaginable scale. Each particle of dust is a testament to a hoof, a wheel, a marching foot multiplied by tens, then hundreds of thousands. The air itself grows thick, not with the promise of life-giving rain, but with the gritty, palpable presence of an approaching multitude, a river of humanity and horses so vast it carries its own choking atmosphere. The horizon is no longer a line. It's a slowly consuming wall of dust, and hidden just behind it, the architects of that storm are riding, steadily, inexorably, closer. The dust, that immense, suffocating curtain, begins to thin in patches. Or rather, shapes begin to resolve within it, like phantoms emerging from an ochre mist. At first, it's just movement, a flicker. Then another, 1,000 flickers coalescing into solid forms. And then you see them. But these are not the knights of your local lord's retinue, nor the romanticized figures from fireside tales encased in shining steel. There is no glint of polished plate armor that catches the sun in familiar ways. No brightly colored pennants proclaiming noble houses you might vaguely recognize from market days. Banish those images from your mind. Instead, what spills from the thinning dust is a seemingly endless river of riders, utterly unlike any warrior you could have conceived. They are clad in dully gleaming, overlapping scales of hardened leather or iron, lamellar armor, though you wouldn't know the word for this strange, flexible protection. Their faces, often broad and weathered, are framed by fur-lined hats or simple unadorned helmets, their eyes narrowed, scanning everything with a chilling dispassion. They sit low and firm upon their shaggy, tireless ponies, creatures almost as alien and resilient as their masters. The sound shifts, too, from that distant, earthy rumble. It solidifies into a million individual hoofbeats, the rhythmic creak of countless leather saddles and harnesses, the metallic whisper of weapons, perhaps a low, guttural murmur rippling through their ranks, a language utterly foreign, holding no comfort. They carry bows, not the long bows of your land, but shorter, powerfully curved shapes, and their swords, glimpsed at their hips, are also curved, practical, and deadly. They just keep coming, ranks upon ranks, stretching wider than your eye can comfortably scan, flowing over the gentle rises and dips in the land like a dark, inexorable tide. There's a chilling, almost silent efficiency to their endlessness. This isn't war as you've ever heard it described. This is something else entirely, something vast and deeply, deeply unsettling. And as they draw closer, resolving from that distant dark river into individual figures, the sheer alienness of their appearance settles upon you like a physical weight, a suffocating blanket of the unknown. Their armor isn't the gleaming plate of knights from storytellers' tales, nor the familiar, if often rusty, mail of local squires. No, this is something utterly different. Layers of hardened leather, or perhaps small, overlapping plates of dark, lacquered iron, give them an almost reptilian or insectoid sheen, moving with a strange, rippling flexibility as they ride. Some wear conical helmets, perhaps rimmed with fur, or topped with horsehair plumes that dance with an unnerving, almost hypnotic rhythm in the slight breeze. Their faces, when you can finally distinguish them beneath the shadow of those helms, are unlike any you have ever encountered, chiseled by winds from lands you cannot even name. Wide cheekbones, skin weathered to a deep tan or ruddy hue from suns and biting gales. Their eyes, often narrowed against a perpetual glare or the dust of endless plains, seem to hold the vast, empty horizons of the steppes themselves. These are not the faces of your kin, nor even of the rare, exotic traders who sometimes pass through. These are the faces of a people forged in a crucible of relentless hardship and constant, unforgiving movement, a world, an entire existence away from your small, rooted life. Even the way they carry themselves, the set of their shoulders, speaks of a brutal pragmatism. There is no chivalric flourish here. No bright heraldry to announce noble lineage. Only the grim functionality of seasoned killers. Their gear, from the quivers bristling with arrows to the strangely curved swords, looks worn, used, but impeccably maintained. It all contributes to an overwhelming sense of the foreign, the deeply unsettling, the arrival of something that does not belong in your world, yet is undeniably, terrifyingly here. And then, before that unsettling feeling can even fully register, before you can share a whispered fear with your neighbor, the world explodes. Not with a single bang, but with a sudden, overwhelming rush. One moment, the distant thrumming is just a curiosity, a vibration felt more in your chest than heard with your ears. The next, it's the thunder of 1,000 hooves, a sound that seems to shake the very soil beneath your worn leather shoes. The ground itself seeming to ripple, the air, just now still and carrying the faint, comforting scent of wood smoke and damp earth from your village, is suddenly thick with acrid dust, kicked up by that impossibly fast cavalry. Shouts erupt, sharp and guttural in a language you cannot comprehend, slicing through the familiar, gentle bleating of sheep or the distant cluck of chickens. There's no warning bell that could possibly toll in time, no chance to rally, no moment to even grasp what is unfolding before your disbelieving eyes. It's a whirlwind, a storm of men and horses. Imagine yourself there. You might see a flash of dark, galloping shapes, the glint of sunlight off something metallic, but it's all a blur, a confusing, terrifying kaleidoscope of motion and alien sound. The concept of an organized defense, or even a coherent escape plan, vanishes in the primal, instantaneous urge to simply not be trampled. Your small, predictable world, the one you knew just heartbeats ago, the one where your biggest worry was the coming winter or a poor harvest, is instantaneously, irrevocably fractured. There is no processing this, only the raw, screaming immediacy of it, a sensory deluge that your mind simply cannot catalog or comprehend in those first, terrifying moments. All that exists is the chaos, the speed, the sudden, violent end of everything you knew. And then, through the dust and the terror, the sounds begin to sharpen, to distinguish themselves from the initial roaring wave. It's a chorus, you realize, but not of any song you've ever known. These are the war cries, guttural and deep, erupting from 100 throats, 1,000. They are alien, unsettling, a primal vibration that seems to shake the very air you're struggling to breathe. You've heard angry shouts in the village tavern, perhaps the bellow of a frustrated farmer, but this is different. This is the sound of organized, terrifying intent. Mingled with these ferocious calls are other, more chillingly familiar noises. The sudden, high-pitched scream of someone you might have shared bread with just this morning, abruptly silenced. The splintering crack of wood as flimsy doors are kicked in, your neighbor's meager defenses proving utterly useless against such fury. And then, the sharp percussive clang of steel, a brutal rhythmic punctuation to the human cries. It's a sound that speaks of finality, of cold, hard metal meeting soft flesh, a sound that promises only pain and an end. This isn't just noise, it's an assault. Each distinct horror, each wave of alien shouts and desperate shrieks is a hammer blow against your sanity, against the fragile hope that this might somehow pass you by. There's no refuge from it, no quiet corner to huddle in where the dreadful symphony cannot reach. The air itself is thick with a cacophony of destruction, a wall of sound pressing in, stealing your breath, drowning out any coherent thought. You try to cover your ears, perhaps, a futile gesture against an ocean of terror, but the vibrations travel through the ground, through your own bones, an inescapable soundtrack to your world's violent, sudden unraveling. Through the deafening roar, your gaze, desperate for some anchor, might fall upon the familiar walls of your own hut. It's a simple thing, isn't it? Wattle and daub, perhaps, chinked with mud you mixed yourself, a roof of thatch that kept out the worst of the summer rains and winter snows. For a lifetime, It has been your small pocket of safety, the boundary between your family and the often unforgiving world outside. You could almost smell the familiar scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and perhaps boiled vegetables clinging to its interior, a scent that usually means comfort. But now, as the wave of chaos rolls ever closer, a new, horrifying clarity dawns. Those walls, so reassuring against a wolf's howl or a bitter frost, are as paper thin against this onslaught. You see the orange glow of approaching flames reflecting in the puddles outside, hear the splintering crack of a neighbor's door giving way with sickening ease. There is no frantic, disorganized rage here, but a terrifying method to it. These invaders, they move with a practiced efficiency, a brutal economy of destruction that makes your heart seize in your chest, cold and heavy. Your home, that tiny structure you poured your sweat and meager resources into, is not a fortress. It's not even an obstacle to these men. It's merely a dry bundle of sticks and straw in the path of a wildfire, ready to ignite. The dawning horror is not just of the immediate violence, but of this profound, crushing realization. There is no sanctuary here. The very concept of shelter, of a safe place to retreat, is being systematically dismantled before your eyes, burned away with the thatch, the rough-hewn door, and all the tiny mundane memories held within. The smoke from your own burning roof now mingles with the haze from a dozen other pyres on the horizon, each a flickering candle snuffed out too soon. You might glance towards the Lord's Manor, a place that once represented a distant, almost mythical authority, a bulwark against the chaos of the world. But the gates, if they still stand, are ominously still, perhaps even ajar, swinging gently in a breeze that carries the scent of distant fires and unknown fears. There are no banners proudly flying, no frantic calls to arms, no reassuring clatter of mail or shouted commands from stern-faced men-at-arms. The silence from that direction is more terrifying than any war cry, a hollow, empty ache where protection should reside. Your lord? He's likely long gone, having gathered his family, his gold, and perhaps the best horses, leaving the rest of you as a regrettable, but in his mind, necessary, delay for the oncoming storm. Or perhaps he and his retinue tried to make a stand, a brief, desperate flurry of resistance, and their heads now adorn spikes outside their own shattered walls, a grim warning already fading into the vast, indifferent landscape of atrocities. The comforting, if sometimes oppressive, idea of a noble protector, someone who would shield your small world from the harsh winds of fate, simply evaporates like morning mist under a cruel, unrelenting sun. There will be no last-minute cavalry charge over the rise, no valiant knights in shining armor riding to the rescue. The only horses you'll see carry riders with faces like stone and intentions as sharp and cold as their steel. This is the stark truth, settling upon you like the cold, gritty ash that begins to drift down from the sky, dusting your hair and clothes. Your small community, your entire known world, feels like an island about to be completely submerged, and there are no lifeboats, no sturdy rafts, only the churning water. Each familiar face you see, etched with terror and disbelief, reflects the same dawning comprehension. You are entirely, irrevocably on your own. The ancient bonds of feudal obligation, so rigidly enforced in times of peace and plenty, have frayed and snapped under the first real, overwhelming strain. The ancient bonds of feudal obligation, so rigidly enforced in times of peace and plenty, have frayed and snapped under the first real, overwhelming strain. And as this grim realization settles, another, more intimate truth begins to prick at your consciousness. You, yourself. Consider your own hands, perhaps softened by a life far removed from relentless toil. Imagine them, now, needing to grip not a familiar tool, but the splintered wood of a hastily grabbed farm implement, or perhaps just clenching uselessly as the earth trembles with the drumming of hooves. Not your muscles, accustomed to gentler exertions. How would they respond to the sudden, desperate demand of flight across broken fields, or the need to haul a terrified child, or even just to stand firm when every instinct screams to collapse? The sheer, visceral shock of it all, the roar of unfamiliar voices, the glint of sun on steel, the acrid smell of smoke, and something more primal, would be a physical blow in itself. Your modern constitution, so carefully insulated from such raw, unmediated experience, is now terrifyingly exposed, like a nerve laid bare. It's not a judgment, this sudden awareness of your own physical frailty in this context. It's merely an observation. Your body, honed for a world of different challenges, now feels like a delicate instrument brought to a blacksmith's forge, ill-suited for the brutal percussion to come. The stamina required just to exist in this moment, to keep fear from paralyzing you, to simply process the chaos, is monumental. And the brutal truth is, the figures now appearing on the horizon, hardened by lives of unimaginable rigor, are built of different stuff entirely. Their bodies as much weapons as the bows they carry. And as they draw closer, these figures resolve not into a mere mob, but an unnervingly cohesive force. Their movements are economical, practiced, devoid of the wild flailing energy you might associate with raiders of old. This isn't a haphazard attack. It's an unfolding design, precise and terrifyingly patient. You witness, perhaps from a trembling vantage point behind a crumbling wall, how a nearby hamlet, one you traded with, whose children perhaps played near your own small patch of land, is approached with this same dreadful precision. There are no lengthy negotiations you can discern, no desperate shouts of warning that linger, offering a sliver of time for pleas or flight. Instead, a terrifying efficiency takes hold, a quiet prelude to the storm. Then, the first plumes of smoke, unnaturally dark and oily, begin to curl skyward, carrying the faint, sickeningly sweet smell of burning thatch mixed with something else, something acrid and deeply unsettling that your mind refuses to name. The sounds that drift on the wind are not just the raw cries of the unfortunate, but a chilling tapestry of organized action, the disciplined shouts in a guttural tongue you've never heard, the sudden, sharp crack of unfamiliar siegecraft, the almost rhythmic thud of destruction. It's the cold, calculated dismantling of a known world, enacted by beings who seem to operate by rules so alien, so devoid of recognizable human empathy, they might as well be from another star. This methodical destruction, this strategic terror, is designed to unmake not just lives and homes but the very will to resist, seeding a despair so profound it suffocates hope before it can even flicker into being. And just when you think the cacophony of destruction on the ground has reached its peak, a new horror unfolds above. Your gaze, perhaps instinctively seeking some divine intervention, is drawn skyward. But there are no angels here. Instead, the pale sky begins to curdle, to darken not with storm clouds, but with a sudden, terrifying bloom of black specks. Thousands upon thousands of them, like a vast angry swarm of insects, arcing with a dreadful silent grace before they begin their descent. This isn't the random spray of a clumsy archer from a village skirmish. This is a suffocating, calculated downpour, a deadly rain designed to find every gap, every exposed sliver of life. The thin wattle and daub walls of your hut, once a meager comfort against the wind and rain, now seem utterly translucent to this threat. The ancient, gnarled oak in the village square, a silent witness to generations, offers no true shield, its broad canopy pierced as easily as thatch. You might scrabble behind a fallen cart, or cower beside a forgotten pile of damp firewood, but the arrows find their way. They thud into soft earth, splinter weathered wood, and whisper past your ear with chilling intimacy before finding softer targets with a sickening, wet finality. It's a chilling, inescapable lesson in exposure. There is almost nowhere truly safe when the sky itself conspires to become a weapon. Each whistling descent carries the same blunt message. You are small, you are vulnerable, and the architects of this storm can reach you anywhere. The despair, already taking root from the earthly chaos, now blossoms fully under this lethal canopy. It's less a battle, more an extermination from afar, orchestrated by unseen hands that have blotted out the sun with their deadly and different intent. And then, as if the rain of iron wasn't enough, comes the glow. At first, it's just a flicker on the horizon, a strange, malevolent sunset where no sun should be setting. But it grows, hungry and eager, painting the underside of the already smoke-choked sky with an angry, pulsating orange. You might feel a phantom warmth on your skin, even from a distance, a promise of the inferno to come. You watch, a cold dread seeping deeper into your bones, as your neighbor's thatched roof, once such a comforting, familiar sight, erupts into a geyser of sparks and then a column of roaring flame. The fire leaps, a gleeful, crackling predator, from one humble dwelling to the next, from one meticulously tended field of wheat to another. The air, already thick with the metallic tang of fear and the dust of chaos, now fills with a new, more suffocating presence. The acrid, stinging smoke of burning homes, burning fields, burning everything you've ever known. It's a smell that clings to the back of your throat, a harsh, unforgettable perfume of absolute loss, mixed with the sickeningly sweet scent of burning grain and perhaps something else, something more terrible. The familiar outline of your village, the gentle curve of the lane you've walked 1,000 times, the shape of the old oak by the well where you fetched water, all begin to warp, to dance strangely, and then vanish behind a shimmering, wavering curtain of heat and flame. Your world, quite literally, is going up in smoke, each crackle a punctuation mark on its utter annihilation. As the acrid haze begins to thin, just a little, shapes coalesce in the shimmering air. Not the familiar forms of neighbors, but something utterly alien. These are the riders, the harbingers of this fiery end. Their faces, framed by strange helms or matted hair, are unlike any you've seen. Broader, with eyes that seem to look right through you, not at you. Their expressions unreadable stone. They move with a purpose that is terrifyingly efficient. Their leather and metal creaking, a stark contrast to the dying groans of your home. Then they speak. Or rather, they make sounds. Harsh, guttural syllables that grate against your ears, a torrent of noise that carries no meaning for you, like stones rattling in a dry gourd. Is it a question, a command, a threat? You strain to understand, your mind desperately sifting through the babble for a single, recognizable inflection, a familiar root of a word you might once have known. But there is nothing. It's like listening to the wind whistling through a ruin, or the growl of a wolf, full of intent perhaps, but utterly incomprehensible. A rough hand might shove you forward, a pointed weapon might gesture towards a gathering crowd of survivors, but the why remains a terrifying blank. Imagine that feeling, that profound, chilling disconnection from the beings who now hold your life, and the lives of anyone left, in their calloused, unreadable hands. You try to plead, perhaps, or ask for mercy, to bargain with the few pathetic trinkets you might still possess. But your own words turn to ash in your mouth, as useless as the cinders underfoot. They are the new masters of your fate, and you cannot even begin to understand the language of their dominion, the subtle shifts in tone that might mean life or death. The silence of your comprehension is a vast, cold space, more frightening than any shout, a chasm you cannot hope to cross. From that chasm of silent incomprehension, another sensation begins to bloom, almost imperceptibly at first. It's not a shout, nor the crackle of flames, but a deeper, more pervasive thrumming, as if the very bones of the earth are vibrating. You might risk a glance, beyond the immediate ruin, past the chilling stillness of those who command your fate. And what you would see, or rather what you would feel, is the true scale of the storm that has broken over your world. Imagine a dark river, not of water, but of horsemen, flowing endlessly from horizon to horizon. The air itself is thick, with a fine, gritty dust, churned up by a million hooves, a constant, choking haze that catches the pale light and turns the world a grim, uniform brown. Each rider, a distant, anonymous silhouette, merges into a single, terrifying organism, a wave of humanity so vast it seems to blot out the sky. Their banners, strange and numerous, ripple like dark omens in the breeze you can no longer feel on your own skin. What then could you, a single soul, with perhaps only a worn-out hoe or a desperate prayer, possibly offer against such a tide? Resistance? It's a word that loses all meaning. Their numbers aren't just a multitude. They represent a relentless, disciplined system, an engine of conquest perfected over countless miles and through generations of warfare. To stand against them would be like trying to hold back the ocean with cupped hands. The sheer oppressive weight of their presence crushes not just bodies but hope itself, long before a sword is even drawn. And as that fragile hope shatters, so too does the very fabric of your small world. In the terrifying maelstrom of a Mongol attack, there is no gentle unraveling of connections. It is a brutal, instantaneous severing. One moment, the familiar cadence of village life hums around you. Your mother perhaps tending a meager fire, your brother attempting to mend a worn-out shoe, the distant, thin laughter of children playing with nothing more than sticks and stones. The air might carry the faint, comforting scent of wood smoke, or the damp, earthy fragrance of the fields after a sparse rain. Then, the earth itself seems to tremble, a low thrum that grows into a deafening roar. It's a sound not of thunder, but of 1,000 hooves, 1,000 throats, a wave of noise that fills the air, swallowing every other familiar sound. Imagine yourself in that instant, the world dissolving into a terrifying blur of kicked-up dust, the glint of unfamiliar steel, and panicked cries that are barely distinguishable from one another. The hand you might have been holding, perhaps your child's or your aging parents', is suddenly, violently wrenched away into the chaos. Faces you've known your entire life, faces that formed the comforting constellation of your existence, flicker past in the bedlam. They are contorted in a terror you mirror. Then they vanish into the swirling, dusty pandemonium, like leaves torn from a tree in a furious storm. There is no time for goodbyes, no fragile moment to even register one loss before another, and then another tears at the edges of your awareness. Neighbors, friends, family, scattered, taken, or fallen. In those first horrifying minutes, the familiar landscape of your heart is wiped clean, leaving you utterly, terrifyingly alone, a solitary reed in a sudden, brutal winter. The silence where their voices, their laughter, their arguments should be, becomes the loudest, most unbearable sound of all. The silence presses in, a suffocating blanket where just moments ago, the comforting, chaotic symphony of your village life played out. Now, your mind, numb with shock, struggles to process. What do you do? The options flicker before your eyes like distorted images in a heat haze, each one a pathway to more suffering, each a different flavor of despair. You could attempt to fight. Perhaps your hand, slick with sweat, closes around a rusted sickle, its curved blade designed for the gentle arc of harvesting wheat, now pathetically repurposed against hardened steel and brutal expertise. Or maybe you heft a piece of firewood, its familiar weight in your trembling grip suddenly feeling laughably inadequate. You might glimpse the oncoming riders, their forms alien and terrifying, their movements economical and deadly. Your courage, if any remains, would likely curdle into a cold knot in your stomach, the air tasting of dust, smoke, and the bitter tang of your own futility. Or perhaps the desperate urge to flee takes hold, a frantic bird beating its wings against your ribs. Run, yes, but where? Into the dense, whispering woods, where every shadow might conceal a new threat? Every rustle of leaves could be the soft footfall of pursuit. The forest floor, usually a carpet of damp earth and fallen needles, would feel like a gauntlet under your bare, stumbling feet. Or do you head for the cold, exposed hills, their barren slopes offering little solace and even less sanctuary? Each path into the unknown is merely an invitation to a different kind of fear, a different kind of end. And then there is the third most passive response: to simply freeze. Your muscles lock, your breath catches high in your throat, and the world narrows to a terrifying, inescapable point. Your feet, which should be carrying you away, feel as though they've grown roots into the blood-soaked earth. It's a chilling paralysis, a surrender not of will, but of the body's ability to comprehend or react to such overwhelming horror. In this terrible stasis, you are a statue awaiting the sculptor's final, brutal chisel stroke. These aren't really choices, are they? Just different currents in a river of catastrophe, all pulling you towards the same dark sea. That brutal chisel stroke, when it comes, isn't the end. Not yet. It's the jarring moment of impact. Rough hands, smelling of horse sweat, old leather, and something metallic like dried blood grabbing you. The sounds are a cacophony, harsh, guttural shouts in a language that scrapes against your ears, the thud of heavy boots, the clatter of weapons now terrifyingly close. There's no negotiation, no plea that will be heard, no recognition in their eyes. You are simply taken, like a sheaf of wheat from a field. Imagine the feel of coarse rope biting into your wrists, the scrape of it against your skin already raw from the cold morning air. You're pulled along, stumbling, part of a bewildered, silent column of your neighbors. Those who weren't cut down where they stood, their bodies already cooling on the frozen ground. Each step takes you further from everything you knew, every familiar scent of wood smoke or damp earth replaced by the alien presence of your captors. The air itself feels different, heavy with their power and your utter suffocating powerlessness. Your future, just moments ago, filled with the simple, earthy anxieties of peasant life. The coming harvest, the temperamental weather, the next meager meal, is now a terrifying vacant space. Will you be a slave, toiling under a foreign sun in some distant, unimaginable land? Will you be a human shield, pushed screaming towards the next fortified town? Or perhaps just a piece of data, a number in their grand tally of conquest before being discarded when your usefulness ends? They don't see a person with a name, with hopes, with a history etched into calloused hands. They see spoils of war, a resource to be exploited, or perhaps just an inconvenience to be managed. Your fate is a chilling lottery, and the croupiers, their faces impassive, hold all the cards, speaking in a tongue that offers no clues, no comfort, only the stark, unyielding reality of your absolute subjugation. The dread settles, a cold, heavy stone in your gut, as the storm you only heard whispers of finally breaks over your small, unsuspecting world. This isn't a distant skirmish, a tale for the tavern to be mulled over with weak ale. This is happening now, to you. The air, once filled perhaps with the scent of damp earth from a morning rain, or the comforting aroma of your small cooking fire, now chokes with the acrid, invasive bite of smoke. So much smoke, thick and black, clawing at the sky, blotting out the familiar face of the sun you relied on to mark the passing of your simple days. The gentle, rhythmic sounds of your village, the bleating of a goat, a neighbor's distant call, perhaps the comforting, rhythmic thud of a loom from a nearby cottage, are swallowed by a terrifying new symphony of chaos. Through the swirling, stinging haze, you might glimpse it. Your own home, the one with the slightly crooked doorframe you always meant to fix, its familiar shape now horribly wreathed in hungry orange flame. The thatched roof, carefully maintained over seasons, collapses inwards with a sickening soft whoosh, sending a shower of sparks into the darkened sky. The small vegetable patch you tended with such care, each tender shoot a small promise of sustenance, is now just a churned morass of mud and ruin, trampled under the heavy, indifferent pounding of countless hooves. Everything that defined your small, known corner of the world, the landmarks you navigated by pure instinct, is either burning, broken, or has simply terrifyingly vanished. In a matter of hours, mere heartbeats it sometimes feels, the entire landscape of your life is brutally redrawn by an unfeeling, alien hand. The well where you drew cool water each morning, the worn path leading to the stream where you washed your clothes, the ancient gnarled oak at the edge of the common field, all of it gone, or rendered so unrecognizable it feels like a cruel mirage. It's a disorienting, nightmarish kaleidoscope, where the comforting, familiar pieces of your existence no longer fit, violently replaced by a terrifying new order. Your very understanding of home, that deep, innate sense of belonging, evaporates like morning mist. leaving only the raw, stinging scent of destruction and the hollow, aching echo of what was, just moments before. There is no comfort left, no familiar anchor in this maelstrom, only the stark, chilling realization that the world you knew has been utterly, irrevocably erased. And then there's you, standing amidst this ruin, or perhaps desperately trying to remain unseen. Your 21st century mind. A mind that instinctively seeks patterns, that expects a certain baseline of societal order, of rules however imperfectly followed, would begin to unravel. It's not merely the visceral fear, though that's a cold, constricting serpent coiling tight around your chest, stealing your breath. It's the profound, disorienting unmaking of everything you inherently trust. You might register the sight of burning thatch collapsing inwards, the smell, acrid smoke, the cloying sweetness of blood, the stench of fear itself, and the distant, terrifying screams. Yet it all feels unreal, like watching a horrifying film reel that's caught fire and is melting frame by dreadful frame before your eyes. Your brain, so adept at processing complex information, at strategizing, at finding solutions, would be utterly, tragically unequipped for this onslaught. This isn't a crisis to be managed with apps or emergency services. It's an apocalypse visited upon your tiny, insignificant world. The very framework of your understanding, that actions have somewhat predictable consequences, that help, however delayed, might eventually arrive, that there are usually limits, some unspoken boundary to human cruelty, crumbles into dust. You'd be left adrift in a void, a howling, silent emptiness, where logic and reason used to reside. How could you even begin to comprehend that your entire world, your future, your past, has been snuffed out in moments by a force so alien, so utterly indifferent to your small, precious life? It's a cognitive sledgehammer, a trauma so profound your psyche would likely fracture, desperately seeking any escape, any numbness, from a reality too horrifying to bear, a reality your modern sensibilities simply cannot compute or accept. And if your mind somehow clung to sanity, perhaps dulled by the sheer weight of shock, your body would soon present its own, equally terrifying challenges. Imagine, for a moment, the simplest of misfortunes in the chaos. A deep, ragged gash from a dropped axe while desperately trying to salvage firewood. Or perhaps a jagged splinter from a shattered cartwheel, burying itself deep in your palm as you stumbled. Such a small thing, really. There are no sterile wipes here, no gleaming steel instruments, no soothing antiseptic creams, certainly no carefully packaged sterile bandages. Perhaps a piece of rag, already stiff with old grime and someone else's sorrow, is pressed against the bleeding. The water used to attempt a cleaning, if any is spared, is likely scooped from a muddy, communal stream, teeming with its own invisible dangers, a murky soup of potential despair. You'd feel the throb, of course, a dull, persistent ache that refuses to be ignored. But soon, a new, insistent warmth would spread from the injury, an angry red blush creeping across your skin like a malevolent tide. A fever might begin to cloud your thoughts, making the rough straw pallet beneath you feel even more coarse and unbearable, your skin alternating between clammy chills and a burning heat. That faint, sweetish, sickly smell wafting up? That's the infection taking hold, an unwelcome guest feasting unseen. Without antibiotics, without even a basic understanding of germ theory, let alone the resources to implement it, your body would be fighting a desperate, losing battle. That small, unfortunate cut, the kind you'd barely notice today, becomes a gateway, an open invitation for a silent, microscopic invasion. Your strong peasant constitution, hardened by years of relentless labor and meager sustenance, would ultimately be no match for this invisible, relentless enemy. A slow, agonizing decline would be almost inevitable, your world shrinking to the rhythm of your own failing breath, each one a little shallower than the last. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? How something so utterly trivial by our modern standards, a quick trip to the chemist for some antiseptic, a clean plaster, perhaps a short course of pills, would have almost certainly spelled your end in that brutal landscape. A tiny scratch, a seemingly insignificant breach, transformed by circumstance into a doorway to oblivion. But let's imagine for a moment that you somehow avoided that particular fate, that your small wound didn't fester, didn't claim you. Instead, you awaken to a different kind of end. The storm has passed. The terrifying thunder of hooves, the shouts of the invaders, all have faded into a chilling stillness. This silence, it's not peaceful, it's heavy, like a shroud draped over what was once your world. Pressing in on you, thick with the smell of smoke from smoldering timbers, and the acrid scent of things best left unnamed. Your ears strain, searching for the familiar sounds of village life, the crow of a rooster, the distant lowing of cattle, the comforting chatter of neighbors. There is none of it. Only the persistent crackle and hiss of flames still consuming what little remains. A hungry, whispering sound in the vast, empty quiet. And then, carried on the slight breeze, almost too faint to truly discern at first, another sound begins to weave its way through the crackling. A soft, rhythmic sobbing, perhaps, or a low, mournful wail drifting from somewhere unseen. It's distant, but it's undeniably human, the sound of someone else who has also woken up to this new, terrible dawn. This is the quiet that follows the tempest. Not a quiet of rest or recovery, but of profound, echoing loss. A silence where every small, isolated sound seems to amplify the ghosts of what was. You might find yourself holding your breath, listening intently, waiting for something, but only the fires reply with their soft destruction, and that distant, heartbreaking testament to survival in a world irrevocably changed, a world now defined by this haunting, desolate peace. That distant sound, a fragile thread of another life, fades eventually into the low crackle of dying fires around you. And then, perhaps, a flicker of grim resolve, or maybe just numb compulsion, pushes you to your feet, if you can even call it standing. Your limbs are heavy, coated in a fine layer of ash that tastes bitter on your tongue if you dare to moisten your lips. The air itself is thick, a gray shroud carrying the scent of burnt wood, scorched earth, and something else, something acrid and deeply unsettling that speaks of more than just timber. You begin to walk, or maybe it's more of a shuffle, through what was once your village, your home. Each step is a soft, mournful crunch on a carpet of soot and debris. Familiar landmarks are twisted into grotesque, alien shapes. The village well, perhaps, is choked with rubble, its cool promise silenced. The path to a neighbor's cottage, a route trodden 1,000 times without thought, is now just a vague indentation in the scarred, smoking earth. Your own home, if you can even distinguish it amongst the blackened timbers and fallen stones, is little more than a hollow shell, its heart torn out. The roof, once a comforting shield, is gone, leaving a gaping maw open to the indifferent, pale sky. Steam still hisses from damp patches where water might have been thrown in a futile attempt to save something, or perhaps it's just the morning dew meeting the still hot embers. The silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind through skeletal remains of walls and the occasional groan of a settling beam, is profound. It's the silence of utter absence. The silence where laughter and chatter and the simple, comforting sounds of life used to echo. You might reach out to touch a charred piece of wood, once part of your door, and feel its brittle, rough surface, still radiating a faint, ghostly warmth. There's a peculiar, chilling emptiness here. A void where memories struggle to find purchase on this new, unrecognizable landscape. It's hard to reconcile what your eyes are seeing with what your heart remembers. This isn't just destruction, it's an erasure. A stark, brutal message written in smoke and ruin. And as you stand there, a solitary figure amidst the ghosts of your former life, the chilling question begins to form. What now? Where does one even begin to step when the entire world you knew has burned down around you? The what now echoes in the hollow of your chest. A question almost immediately drowned out by a more primal, urgent demand. Your stomach, a tight, aching knot, begins to make its presence known. The familiar comfort of your small grain store, the scent of dried herbs, the promise of a simple evening meal, all are now just wisps of memory, replaced by the acrid smell of ash and despair. You might stumble towards where the village larder once stood, a communal hope, only to find it ransacked, its contents spilled and spoiled, or simply gone, carted away by the tide of invaders. The air itself feels thin, lacking the usual comforting aromas of baking bread or simmering stew. Instead, it carries the metallic tang of blood and the damp, unsettling smell of disturbed earth. Thirst, a dry rasp in your throat, soon joins the gnawing hunger. The village well, once a source of cool, clear water, might now be fouled, a grim testament to the recent chaos. Or perhaps it's simply inaccessible, guarded by fear or by the remnants of the recent violence. Each gulp of air feels like swallowing dust. The specter of starvation isn't a distant worry. It's a cold presence walking beside you, its breath chilling your neck with every passing hour. The fields, your future, are trampled, burned, or abandoned. There is no solace, no easy answer. Only the growing, terrifying certainty of an empty belly and a parched tongue, in a world suddenly devoid of its most basic kindnesses. This is the new reality, a slow, creeping dread that settles deep in your bones, heavier than any stone. Beyond the gnawing hunger, a different kind of emptiness begins to settle in, a hollowing out of the spirit. The familiar faces of your village, the comforting murmur of shared work, the knowing glances exchanged over a flickering fire, all are gone. Where laughter once echoed during a meager harvest festival, or a sympathetic hand rested on a shoulder in times of sorrow, there is now only an unnerving, expansive silence. It's a silence so profound it seems to absorb every other sound, the whisper of the wind through the skeletal remains of burned-out huts, the distant, mournful cry of a lone bird. You might find yourself straining your ears, listening with an almost painful intensity for any sign of human life. A footfall, a cough, even a shouted argument. But the air carries nothing back, save for the lingering acrid scent of old smoke and the damp, earthy smell of disturbed ground. Each sunrise, painting the bruised sky with indifferent colors, brings not a flicker of hope, but a renewed, crushing awareness of your solitude. The well-trodden paths that once connected homes, weaving a tapestry of community, are now just indistinct trails, leading from desolation to deeper desolation. Who would you share a scavenged route with, if you were lucky enough to find one? Whose voice could you seek for comfort when the shadows lengthen and the night creatures begin to stir? This profound isolation becomes a relentless companion, more chilling than the wind, heavier than the grief. It whispers that you are utterly, irrevocably alone, a forgotten speck in a vast, uncaring world, and perhaps, it gently suggests, it would be far easier to simply lie down and let the quiet earth reclaim you. But even if you found some hidden wellspring of resolve, some flicker of defiance against that gnawing solitude, the world around you is actively conspiring to usher you towards that final, quiet rest. The silence that follows the storm of hooves and steel is not one of peace. It's a thick, cloying silence, heavy with the unspoken. You might notice the air itself tastes different, carrying a faint, sweet-sour tang that clings to the back of your throat, the perfume of decay, a constant, unwelcome companion. The fields, once vibrant green or gold, are now pocked with the unburied, their stillness a stark contrast to the buzzing of flies that create a low, incessant hum, a soundtrack to this new reality. Sanitation, a concept barely understood, even in kinder times, has utterly collapsed. The local stream, where you might have once cooled your feet or drawn water for a meager stew, now flows sluggishly, clouded with refuse and the unseen seeds of sickness. Each sip, driven by desperate thirst, becomes a gamble, a quiet wager against an invisible foe. And your own body, starved and stressed, is a welcoming host for these silent invaders. A creeping chill that has nothing to do with the evening air, a dull ache settling behind the eyes, a gut that twists with an unfamiliar fire. These are the gentle heralds of what's to come. There are no healers left, no comforting broths or knowledgeable hands, only the slow, inevitable surrender as the invisible tide of pestilence washes over the land, claiming the weakened, the unlucky, the isolated. It's a quiet, undramatic end, perhaps, but no less final. How long could anyone truly resist when the very elements of life have turned traitor? Perhaps, against all odds, the sickness spares you, or you simply run out of anything to sustain you in your hiding place. Driven by a gnawing emptiness that overpowers even fear, you might venture out from the ruins of whatever shelter you'd found. The world outside is a study in silence and ash. The wind whispers through charred timbers, carrying the faint metallic tang of old fires and something else. Something unsettlingly sweet, a scent that speaks of things best left undisturbed. You are not, it turns out, entirely alone. A flicker of movement in the distance, another soul, or perhaps just a trick of the smoke-hazed light. As it draws nearer, the shape resolves into a human form, but one that shares your own gaunt, hunted look. Their eyes, sunken and shadowed, meet yours across the desolate expanse. There's no greeting offered, no flicker of camaraderie you might have once expected from a fellow human. Only a raw, almost animalistic assessment. What do you have? What can they take? What threat do you, in your wretched state, possibly pose? Every rustle of your meager, dirt-stiffened rags, every involuntary shift of your weight is scrutinized. If you've managed to scavenge a withered turnip from a forgotten patch, or a handful of questionable grain clutched in a grimy pouch, you hold it tighter, instinctively shielding it. This isn't a meeting of fellow sufferers seeking solace. It's a cautious, silent dance between two starving creatures, each wondering if the other is predator or simply more pathetic prey. The air itself feels taut, crackling with unspoken suspicion, a silent, desperate calculus of survival. In this newly broken world, another human is rarely a sign of hope, but often just another competitor for the last, bitter mouthful. But even that desperate, internal struggle for a scrap of sustenance fades into a dull ache when you remember the true architects of this desolation. They are not always seen, these Mongol patrols, and that, perhaps, is the worst part. Sometimes, it's just a rumor whispered from a hollow-eyed refugee stumbling in from the east, a tale of smoke on the horizon where a village once stood, a silent testament to their passing. Or perhaps it's a sudden, unnatural silence in the woods, where even the birds seem to hold their breath, the quiet itself a warning. You strain your ears, trying to discern if that distant thrumming is the wind through skeletal trees, or something far more ominous, the faint, rhythmic beat of approaching hooves. Every shadow seems to lengthen unnaturally in the failing light. Every snapped twig underfoot sounds like a thunderclap in your own terrified ears. You find yourself scanning the tree line, not for berries or firewood, but for the glint of unfamiliar steel, or the unwelcome silhouette of a mounted archer against the gray sky. The thought of an enslavement party is a cold dread that settles deep in your bones, a far worse fate, for many, than a quick, if brutal, death. They could appear at any moment, a whirlwind of terrifying efficiency, and your life, already so fragile, would become theirs to dispose of. This isn't just fear of an attack, it's the gnawing anxiety of utter powerlessness. The chilling knowledge that your existence hangs by the thinnest of threads, held by hands that might value it less than a lame horse. The air itself seems to taste of old smoke, and a constant simmering apprehension. Sleep, when it comes, is shallow, haunted by shapes in the dark, and the echo of unheard cries. That constant, prickling unease settles deep into your bones, a permanent companion. So, naturally, the thought forms. Escape. You must get away, leave this blighted place, but as your eyes scan the smoke-stained horizon, a heavier dread begins to seep in, cold and viscous. Where exactly would you go? The roads, those familiar muddy tracks you once walked to market, are now gauntlets of terror. They aren't just empty, they whisper with the unseen, perhaps desperate bandits, starving like you, or worse, a swift Mongol patrol, their ponies' hooves a distant, percussive threat that tightens your chest. News, if it can even be called that, carried on the wind like ashes and fear, speaks of other villages, other towns, all sharing your plight, or already silenced, their stories extinguished. There are no safe havens, no distant cousins in a peaceful valley untouched by the storm. The storm is the world now. Even the deep woods, usually a place of quiet refuge for a lost sheep or a moment's peace, offer no real sanctuary. How long could you survive there, with nothing but the clothes on your back and the gnawing fear in your heart? The damp cold of the forest floor seeps into your worn shoes, the hunger becomes a dull ache, and every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sounds like an approaching rider. The vastness of the steppe, once a symbol of endless horizons, now feels like an enormous, open-air cage, and you, a tiny, scurrying creature, caught within its invisible, unyielding walls. The realization dawns, slowly and crushingly. There is no outrunning this tide. There is only the waiting. And so, the waiting stretches, each moment an eternity. The air itself seems to hold its breath, heavy with unspoken fears, thick like the cloying scent of damp earth and distant smoke. You might find yourself huddled with a precious few others, the silence between you a physical weight, broken only by the occasional, involuntary shiver that isn't entirely from the creeping cold. The familiar landmarks, the old oak at the edge of the field, its leaves usually a comforting rustle, now still. The gentle curve of the river, once a source of life, now a potential trap. The distant silhouette of the church spire, a beacon no more. They all seem alien, like features on the face of a stranger. They are still there, but their meaning has been stripped away, painted over with a layer of profound dread. The stories you once told your children, perhaps by the meager firelight, of local spirits or brave village ancestors, now feel like foolish, fragile whispers from a world that has simply ceased to exist. What comfort can those old tales offer against the memory of thundering hooves, the glint of unfamiliar steel, and the chilling efficiency of this new, incomprehensible power? The very framework of your life, that predictable, reassuring cycle of planting and harvest, of market days and quiet holy days, has irrevocably shattered. It's not merely the fear of death, though that is a constant, gnawing companion, a cold stone settled deep in your gut. It's the deeper, more chilling realization that your world, the only one you've ever understood, has ended. The future isn't just uncertain. It's a terrifying, vacant canvas upon which a new, brutal master is about to paint. And you, with your small hopes and simpler dreams, are but a speck, a tiny, forgotten detail in their vast, sweeping, and indifferent design. Beyond the terror painted on that vacant canvas of your future, an even more insidious enemy lurks, one you cannot see, nor likely even comprehend. It's not a warrior with a curved sword or a thundering hoof, but something far more intimate. The very air you breathe, the water you might desperately scoop from a muddy puddle, the brief, trembling touch of a fellow sufferer. Your body, a product of centuries of sanitation yet to come, of medical knowledge beyond wildest medieval dreams, is a pristine, undefended landscape for the microscopic terrors of the 13th century. Imagine, if you will, the invisible swarm, the bacteria thriving in the filth of a hastily abandoned village, or a temporary, desperate camp where waste mingles with the rain-soaked earth. The virus is passed on a cough, a sneeze, in conditions where hundreds huddle together for warmth or imagined safety, their breath mingling in a shared, anxious cloud. Your immune system, so adept at fighting off the common cold of your own time, would stand bewildered before these ancient, aggressive pathogens. It's never met these particular invaders. The local peasant, though no stranger to hardship and sickness, has at least a generational familiarity, a battered, weary resilience built over a lifetime of exposure to this specific microbial world. You, however, arrive with an immune response calibrated for an entirely different, far cleaner age. That first sip of questionable water, tasting faintly of soil and something unpleasantly organic, or that shared breath in a crowded, smoky hut thick with the scent of unwashed bodies and fear, could be the quiet beginning of your end. A fever might bloom not as a gradual discomfort, but as a raging fire within, your skin shockingly hot to your own touch. A stomach ailment could become a swift, dehydrating nightmare, leaving you weak and trembling, Before any Mongol soldier even glances your way, your own highly evolved yet tragically naive biology could be the thing that seals your fate, turning you into just another still form amidst the chaos, a victim not of the sword, but of the unseen. And it's not as if the historical peasant was some delicate flower, wilting at the first sign of trouble. Oh no, far from it. These were people whose very spirits, not just their bodies, were tempered by a lifetime of relentless grinding toil. Imagine hands like ancient, gnarled roots, skin weathered to the texture of old, supple leather by biting wind and scorching sun. Their backs knew the permanent ache of bending low over unforgiving earth. Hunger was a familiar shadow, the gnawing in the belly a frequent, unwelcome guest. They had watched, helpless, as fevers blazed for their kin, ailments that we, with our modern comforts, can scarcely comprehend without a sterile room and medicine. Their resilience was a deeply ingrained thing, etched into their very being. Yet the oncoming storm of the Mongol advance, that was a different order of suffering. This wasn't merely another harsh winter to endure, or a blight upon the crops. This was a human hurricane, a methodical, terrifying force designed to pulverize not just bodies, but hope itself. The sheer, overwhelming scale of it could snap the strongest will, extinguish the most stubborn spark of defiance. So as you rest now, perhaps on a soft bed in a quiet room, picture that. If even those souls, forged in the unforgiving furnace of medieval life, often found themselves utterly consumed by this tide, what genuine chance would a gentler, modern existence truly stand? It's a stark thought, a quiet echo from a brutal past, reminding us of the thin veil between our world and theirs. And it wasn't just your world, your small, muddy village, that would be irrevocably altered. Imagine the very maps of your understanding, those mental lines you drew between safe havens and known dangers, suddenly smudged and redrawn with brutal, uncaring strokes. Entire kingdoms, sprawling societies that had felt as permanent as the mountains themselves, could crumble into dust within a single season. Think of the grand tapestry of life. The merchants with their precious silks and spices, the scholars poring over ancient texts, the stonemasons raising cathedrals towards the heavens. All of it, unraveled thread by this relentless storm. The roads you might have known, perhaps paths worn smooth by generations of feet, would now echo with an unfamiliar tongue, or worse, fall utterly silent, reclaimed by weeds and fear. The comforting rhythm of market days, the distant chime of a monastery bell, these familiar sounds would be swallowed by an immense, consuming quiet, or replaced by the chilling drum of hooves on the horizon, a sound that meant not trade, but termination. It's hard to grasp, isn't it? The sheer, overwhelming scale of it, not just a bad harvest or a cruel lord, but the wholesale erasure of a world, the very air thick with the dust of what used to be. Your grandfather's stories of old borders, of ancient alliances and enmities, would become quaint, irrelevant fables in the face of this new, vast empire forged in speed and terror. The old certainties, the very bedrock of how society functioned, from who collected the taxes to who blessed the fields, simply ceased to exist. It was more than just a series of battles. It was a seismic shift, a redrawing of the human landscape on a scale that few events in history can truly rival, leaving behind a profound and desolate silence where civilizations once hummed with bustling life. That desolate silence wouldn't last. It was a silence pregnant with dread, soon to be shattered by a storm unlike any your village had ever conceived. Now picture that one, single day. Not the weeks of whispered rumors or the days of distant smoke, but the day. It begins not with the rooster's crow, but perhaps with a sound you can't quite place, a low rumble on the earth, a tremor felt more in your bones than heard with your ears, growing with an awful, inevitable certainty. Then, the screams, a chorus of pure terror that rips through the morning air, closer than you'd ever prayed they would be. The accumulated weight of this day is what truly crushes. It's not just one horror, but a relentless cascade. Imagine the acrid, choking smell of burning thatch and damp earth, your neighbor's home, then yours. catching like tinder in a dry summer. The sight of familiar faces, contorted in fear, then pain, then nothing. The desperate, fumbling scramble for a child's hand, slippery with sweat or worse, amidst the chaos. Each second piles on a new, unbearable load. The frantic whinny of a panicked horse, the sharp clang of unfamiliar steel, the guttural shouts in a language that heralds only doom. There's no time to process, no space to grieve one loss before another crashes down upon you. This isn't a slow decline into hardship. It's a terrifying plummet. Your world, everything familiar and cherished, every stone of your hearth, every shared memory in the village square, is systematically, brutally unmade before your very eyes, all within the span of a few devastating hours. The sun that rose on a life, however meager, however predictable, might set on its smoldering ruin, or perhaps you wouldn't even see it set. It's this concentration of anguish, this terrible distillation of suffering into a single, sun-drenched or smoke-filled day, that's almost impossible for us, in our relative comfort, to truly grasp. It truly is a depth of experience, a raw, visceral encounter with fate, that thankfully remains distant for most of us. As the echoes of those distant hoofbeats fade from our minds, and the imagined scent of wood smoke and fear begins to dissipate, allow your thoughts to settle here, in the quiet of your own space. Consider the air you breathe, likely clean and untainted by the fires of conquest. Think of the walls around you, solid and secure, a silent testament to a stability almost unimaginable in those tumultuous times. The sounds that reach your ears now are probably gentle, familiar, perhaps the distant hum of a city at rest, or the whisper of the wind, rather than the terrifying cacophony of a world collapsing. There is no need to listen for the approach of unseen horsemen, no frantic peer through a crack in a wooden shutter for the glint of sun on steel. The day we've walked through, even in our imaginations, was one lived on a knife's edge, where every sunrise brought with it a fresh wave of uncertainty, and every shadow could conceal an existential threat. The very ground beneath your feet then would have felt treacherous, uncertain, and as our story gently closes, perhaps feel a quiet gratitude for the peace and relative safety of your own time, a stark contrast to the day we've journeyed through. This isn't to diminish the struggles of today, of course, but to offer a different perspective, a quiet appreciation for the stillness that surrounds you now. It's a stillness bought by centuries of change, a stillness that was a forgotten dream for so many who endured such storms of history. Allow that thought to rest with you, a soft reminder of the long, winding path from then to now, as you too drift towards rest. Thank you for joining us on Restful Historian. Until our next story, may your thoughts be calm and your rest deep.